welcome to WarrenThornton.com. Of course, we have this massive show for you, of course, hopefully everybody is enjoying themselves. We're just about to put the live stream up right now, so we'll just wait for 10 seconds. Just to let you know, if you are joining us, pop across to WarrenThornton.com. The first hour, obviously, is zoomed and is shown live and for free. But the second hour and anything else that we're showing you, obviously, we have to do behind a paywall, because we're going to show you videos, show you things that get the authorities a little upset. We're just about to get James Tweedy to come and join us, who's fashionably late. Let's get him promoted to a panelist. James Tweedy, of course, is our regular Tuesday night, who occupies our regular Tuesday night slot from Sputnik, and we'll get him on as soon as we can. And here he is. Good evening, James. James Tweedy from Sputnik, everybody. How are you, James? Are you well? Oh, you haven't got your mic on, buddy.
Good evening, James.
I'm fine, thanks, Warren. How are you? Sorry.
I'm absolutely fine. It is good that you are with us, because we have so much to get into tonight. And of course, there are many, many things that we're going to get into a bit later on to do with Russia. The very, very thing that I do want to talk about, though, first is all the Trump stuff that's been going on. So, James, I want to talk about Trump, and I want to talk, obviously, about missiles. Now, there's been a lot of nonsense floating about. At the moment, Trump hasn't said yes to this. I don't think he's going to say yes. In fact, I would be amazed if he does. Do you share my optimism in Trump turning around and saying, no, you cannot have Tomahawk missiles?
I think he's playing a lot of funny games, and I think part of what it is he's trying to sell missiles to countries in Europe, NATO, other NATO members. He's trying to sell everything to other NATO members. That's what he's been doing. In his first term as president, he said they weren't spending enough money on defense, by which he meant they're not buying enough arms from the US.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then he threatened to leave NATO, and they should have told him, okay, leave. And just go. Yes. We're not raising our and call his bluff on that one.
So
we don't care. Okay, so there's this. I think he may also be playing this game of trying to up the ante, to use the poker reference, to raise the stakes.
Yes.
In the hope of trying to force Russia to have a peace, have a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, which would look good for Trump, but wouldn't necessarily solve anything. And the Russians aren't interested in doing that, because Zelensky is not ready to agree to, anything. Yeah. But the problem with it is, then he justified this by sort of repeating what Zelensky or I don't know, the CIA had told him about how the war is going, and that in Russia everyone is queuing up for miles to fill up their car at the petrol station and all this sort of thing. And which there are reports that that's not true, and in fact the Russians say that it's basically only a problem. It's only really a problem in Crimea and sort of in some parts of the south of the country. So anyway, that's that whole thing. So he uses that, but then there may be like some major defeats coming from for the Ukrainian army in the next few months, and then the whole thing is going to look very empty, if you see what I mean.
Yes. Very much.
And then giving them some, I don't know, Tomahawk missiles. The problem with the Tomahawk missiles is they could be carrying nuclear warheads. If the Russians see one on the radar and they can tell what it is, those are missiles that were built to carry nuclear warheads for a surprise attack by flying very low under the radar. And that's why they were deployed in the UK, for instance, during the Cold War to try and to get ready for some sort of sneak attack on the Soviet Union. And the Russians know all about that. And if they see like lots of them coming, they might assume that it's a nuclear attack, or it's the prelude to a nuclear attack, because they're going after strategic targets, and they might start launching things in return. So I really hope that he's not going to sell them to approve their sale to any European countries and let them give it to, and then let them re-export them to Ukraine.
Now let's be absolutely straight here. I was fairly bullish about this, and I'm going to sort of tell you, my stance on this. My stance on this, I don't think Trump is that stupid to allow what, let's face it, is a lunatic fringe of the Ukraine to have these missiles, and also then to launch them where Ukraine want them launched. Is it a possibility, now I'm playing devil's advocate here, that he lets them have the Tomahawks but doesn't give them the codes to launch them?
That would be foolish.
Yeah.
Because it would, like the Russians would be aware of whether they are there or not, because they do have their own their intelligence services are working, and they are working in Ukraine, and there's Ukrainian spies in Russia as well, as well as US spies in Britain spying on us. Yes. And they would know, and then it would become a bone of contention. They would say, well, the US has put these missiles in, has given these missiles to Ukraine. So they're not serious about a peace deal. If Trump or his envoy Steve Witkoff tried to, get some talks going or something to make themselves look good again, the Russians will say, well, no, we're not going to, because you gave those missiles, which could be carrying, 500 kiloton thermonuclear warheads or something, to Ukraine. So why did you do that? If you want to end the war, you've got to stop supplying the arms to Ukraine, and then it will end like that.
Yeah, I mean, the primary danger of the escalation of hostility against Russia sort of lies in the reckless actions of certain actors driving massive military budget increases, as you said, arming Ukraine with increasingly advanced weapons and fueling this anti-Russia paranoia, which is off the charts. And these actors sort of fail to consider the consequences of their rhetoric and decisions. The stark reality is the growing tensions, especially between Brussels and Moscow, risk a Franz Ferdinand moment, don't they? And if anybody doesn't know, a youngster's watching, and you don't know who Franz Ferdinand was, he was the guy who was shot, the Archduke who was shot, as a reference to the assassination that triggered World War One, when the West began to implement the Eastern Partnership Project, push NATO eastward, orchestrate colour revolutions, advise, support, fund, arm Russia-phobic forces. It laid the groundwork for a military confrontation. And the reasons behind Europe's belligerence and readiness to escalate the conflict rather than seek a peaceful solution is it's vital not merely for specific European politicians or elites, but for Europe as a whole and its leading powers. The EU's leadership appears to believe that only by decisively weakening Russia can Europe secure the resources and influences needed to maintain what is, let's face it, a fragile unity and its global reverence. For me, the assertion that the Russian collapse is essential for Europe is not mere speculation. It articulated it actually in official European documents. These documents explicitly state that the current conflict within Ukraine over Ukraine is existential for Europe, akin to Hamlet's question of, to be or not to be. Europe recognises that under modern geopolitical conditions, even major states like Germany, France or Italy cannot individually assume a hegemonic role, yet only such a role would grant certain EU countries the crazy privilege typical of a rent-seeking hegemon. The collapse of the Soviet Union did provide Western Europe with access to vast markets in Eastern Europe, the Balkans and the former USSR, along with an abundance of resources, particularly energy, at minimal cost. It was with these resources that European unity was secured. Now, the EU is now pursuing an escalation to keep expanding its reach and thus save the House of Cards from collapse. Europeans have largely forgotten what a conflict with Russia leads to. They seem to have lost the fear that ensured peace for decades. But a new Franz Ferdinand moment wouldn't just lead to the tragic annihilation of one generation of Europeans, but it could require, render the entire continent uninhabitable for generations to come. And you sort of hope it won't come to that. But are the European leaders so far off the horse that they can't get back on, James?
Europe traded with the Soviet Union and the other countries in the Comecon, the Communist Economic Community. Yeah, the other Eastern European countries. They did trade with them. The USA didn't. I think they had trade embargoes on the Soviet Union, but not strictly on all the other countries. You see, so what happened in between 1989 and 1991 didn't open up any markets. Those markets were already open. You see, and everything was going fine until 2022 because they were able to import gas from Russia, and that balanced supply against demand and kept the price down. Now the price has shot up, and you're getting deindustrialization in Germany. So they've created this whole problem for themselves because they listen to the people who say, well, no, we can't allow a country which is a large country which is united and militarily strong and economically strong to exist outside of our little orbit. And even though Russia was in the G8 for a bit, they excluded Russia because they wanted to do that. Now it's basically a very bad idea. And by the way, the EU is a lot more pragmatic in its relations with China. And it's rather hard to get any goods from China to and from China without them passing through Russia or through other former Soviet states. So
James, let me jump in there and ask you a question then, because we had Annalena Baerbock go. We had Ursula von der Annalena Baerbock. So we've had three of the European Union granddaughters, shall we say, or the three of the European leading ladies. Ursula von der Leyen went. She upset them so much she got passport searched when she went to China. She had to join the normal queue, the embarrassing, rather than being swept through the airport. Annalena Baerbock literally had her press conference with the Chinese shut down, or her talk with the Chinese shut down, because she tried to lecture the Chinese on human rights. And of course, Kaja Kallas got so furious trying to get with her Russophobia that she knocked a cup of coffee over Wang Yi's arm. These
are people who they're in favor of the war with Russia, and then they want China to put sanctions to stop trading with Russia, which China is not going to do because it's certainly not in China's interest at all.
Absolutely,
they do a lot. They do a huge amount of trade with Russia, and they get a lot of their energy needs from Russia. And there's technology that Russia produces that the Chinese can't really produce to the same quality, and things like that. Certain technologies. So they have. So that was just a symptom. That's why those things happened. And the Chinese are like, why are you even talking to us about this? All we do with you, the only relationship we have with you is trade, and a lot of it. So let's just keep the trade going, and that's all we need to be talking about. And then, you mentioned Franz Ferdinand or something, his assassination was a pretext. There had been all sorts of small wars going on in Europe between 1900 and 1914, and they were all getting ready to fight this big one. They were all arming up, and they were getting ready to fight this big one. And then it was a pretext for, for Austria to invade Serbia.
Yes,
and then that was, because the Austro-Hungarian Empire already controlled a large part of Yugoslavia at that time,
It
but
did.
not Serbia.
Yeah.
So they invaded Serbia, and that drew Russia in, and so on. And
It just
you know,
escalated.
basically, they all jumped in. They were all really happy for it to happen, and they jumped in because they wanted to redraw the maps of the colonies in Africa and elsewhere. So
Yes.
they and so they went for it, and the world was in a crisis of overproduction. All these countries were heavily industrialized, and they were producing tons of stuff, and they wanted those monopoly markets in the colonies, and they were producing too much, and it was driving down prices and
Let me ask you.
cutting profits, right? And so they went and they ended up destroying the German economy for about 10 years or something. Just to
So let me jump in, James. Let me jump in here because there's a lot of analogies there that are ringing true today. We've got problems over economies and emerging markets and everything else, and divvying up the world again. It seems to be as though there's big shake up with BRICS and everything else, and people are throwing their toys out of the pram, and the European Union and everything else, which wants to be this institution that it's not, that can't agree with itself. We've got a major problem here because if you read The Guns of August, which is a book about World War One, and I would urge anybody to go and read it, we sort of got on this treadmill where, as you were saying there, where suddenly Russia mobilized, then Germany mobilized, then France mobilized, and then suddenly, the Germans swung into Belgium, which brought the British into the war. Are we getting to a point where we've seen what's happened with the Moldovan elections, and we know that Moldovan soldiers are now going to go into Ukraine, at least 700 of them that Sandu has said she's going to promise to go in, and of course there'll be more once they get slaughtered. Are we starting to get to a point, or are we at a point where people have picked sides and we're just on this escalator that we can't get off?
Sorry. Yeah, okay. A lot of people are set on this. Now,
Yeah.
Donald Trump's election, to me, was a sign that the consensus among the rich and powerful in the USA, the big business interests, had changed, that this was not having the desired effect because it wasn't causing a regime change. It wasn't forcing the Russian government to collapse. Basically, it wasn't collapsing the Russian government. It wasn't breaking up the Russian Federation into countries that never existed, and it wasn't even weakening Russia, as they said. Russia was getting stronger, and it was causing economic damage in the West, and the risks were getting too high because the Biden government in the USA kept escalating, and
Yes.
the Russians kept warning them against doing that. So, and the way that they escalated, by the way, were ways that which did not win the war and did not cause any kind of collapse in Russia. They just were provocative, right?
Yes.
And so, they could see that, and they said, no, we're going to change this. We've got to let Trump be president again, and then he can talk peace. But the people who thought the war should continue and it was a great idea, they're still there. They're still in Washington, and a lot of them are in the Republican Party, and a lot of them are in Donald Trump's government, or they're running things like the CIA. And so they can still influence him.
So
because he doesn't have all these ideas for himself. You know what I mean?
So let's get into this then, James. So we'll deal with each individual group of people, right? Now, Robert and I have a slight disagreement in that Robert says that the people of Russia are getting frustrated with Putin because he's not moving fast enough. I'm on the other bus. I think they'll stay behind Putin 100% because he's actually winning. He's actually winning, and at the end of the day, if the Russians are winning, I know that they count the cost, but they tend to count the cost after, if you know what I mean. And I don't think we in the West understand how the Russians make war or win wars. So let's deal with that first. In your estimation, because you work for Sputnik, so you've got your ear to the ground. Are people frustrated with Putin with his steady as she goes attitude, and he's talking too much to Trump, or are the or are the people turning around and going, this is no good, we need to get on with this? Which way is it looking?
I mean, okay, I hear that there are a lot of people who are sort of more hard line.
Yes, there are.
But what is their alternative?
Yeah.
I mean, they can't replace Putin with anyone who's more hardline, because who is there really? And who's a credible president? They have to, there's nothing wrong with Putin meeting Trump and talking to Trump. In fact, everyone in the West said it was a victory for Putin, because Putin was they think that Putin was a pariah until that moment, which he wasn't. And then they rolled out the red carpet for him in Alaska, in the middle of nowhere, basically.
Which caused everybody to have a meltdown.
Yeah, exactly. They said, "Oh, it's Anyway, but it was a victory, because actually it was, the US admitting that it has to negotiate its way. It can't win the war, has to negotiate its way out. There you go. Right? So, and, it's easy for everyone to be an armchair general.
Yes.
But what do you, I mean,
where do you go if you decide to escalate? I mean,
Russia is not officially at war with, is not officially at war with Ukraine, and is definitely not officially trying to occupy all of Ukraine, and never was, despite all the propaganda here.
Yeah.
And a lot of what the Ukraine does, like sending drones to kill civilians or firing artillery rockets over the border to kill civilians, even very expensive missiles just to kill civilians.
It's to irritate and escalate.
Yeah, well, it's an attempt to make people angry with the government, with the Russian government. But of course, who are they going to really be angry with? They know whose fault it is. So all of these things, they can't do anything. They can't win militarily, so they're doing that. And then that tells you that the whole thing is really over. It's not, the situation is not going to reverse at this point. That's
my second point then, James. If you've got so you're the kid sitting one row in front in the classroom, and the two kids behind you are the EU and Ukraine, and they keep walking and they keep leaning over and flicking you behind the ear. You've got the EU on one ear and then Ukraine on the other. How long before Russia go, I'm tired of getting my ears flicked here, and they turn around and literally give them a thump? Or do you think Putin's got eternal patience?
Because, well, Russia is not a child in the classroom. It's a country with nuclear weapons.
But they're not
going to do that. They're not going to do that. Why would they do that? What's the point?
Yeah. How long do you put up with the provocation?
Because because it's a country. It's not an individual person. It's not a child who's being wound up. It's a country with a collective government. And they know what they're doing. They have a plan.
And they're sticking.
Yeah, they're sticking to the plan. And they know that what are you going to do? You're going to fire them, start launching missiles into Poland or somewhere. Or Romania.
James, I'm with you. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, Yeah,
exactly. But if they do things like that, they know that there are people in Washington, D.C. who would win the argument, because things are on a knife edge, right, in the White House, and they would win the argument that that Trump has to escalate things even further, possibly by attacking Russia, right? And then Russia will have to respond to that, right? Because they can't not respond to that, and especially if it's a serious attack, and things will continue to escalate, and then, like you say, everyone will be killed.
Yeah,
right?
So I've got a question.
So we'll all be dead. So the Russians don't really want that. So they're not going to respond to if Estonia is allowing Ukrainians to launch drones and attack places near St. Petersburg.
Yes.
Or the city of St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to bomb Estonia.
No.
Because
No.
they may be doing that, and if they are, the Russians know it, but they are not, because they can see them coming across the border on the radar. But they are not going to bomb Estonia. And that's why the governments of the Baltic states behave in that ridiculous way that they do.
Yes.
Because they know the Russians are not going to do that, because they're not going to play into the hands of the people who want World War III for real.
Yeah, and they're not going to bomb the UK either. I mean, they drop a bomb on Blackpool at the moment, and only do £3 worth of damage. James, let's get into the Americans then, because for you, does Trump? I don't think he does. I don't think he's that stupid, and I don't think it's not so much Trump. I think there are enough people in the White, and of course the public in most European countries and America don't want a bar of this war. Trump is he's almost like he's got one foot out the door, and then he jams his foot back in to stop them closing the door. Are we at the point where we have enough people in the White House to go, look, Tomahawks are out of order, do not give them to Ukraine? Does he give them?
He's not going to give them to Ukraine. He's going to sell them to countries in Europe.
Okay.
Right. And then he's going to wash his hands of it. And that's, obviously you can't really do that, because as it works,
you'll need the launch
all these
code.
countries have agreements when they sell arms to. Okay, so the private company is making the arms, right? But it has to apply to the government for a license to sell them to another country. And in that, and part of that license means that there will be an agreement in the contract that country won't re-export them to another country.
Exactly, like the Chinese.
Like, they won't sell the Tomahawks to Iran or something without the US permission.
Yes.
Right? Without the first country's, the permission of the government of the first country that was selling, right? And all that sort of thing. That's how it works. Okay. I'm telling you, Trump has got two very simple things. He's trying to, he's serving the arms industry in the US by trying to get people in the European members of NATO to buy more arms from them, and other countries like Australia and New Zealand. And he's trying to make himself look good by getting a peace deal, and he thinks he can bully Russia into.
Not going to happen though, that is it? That's a crazy.
No, it isn't. But that's how every other US president behaves as well. So.
So let's get into this then, James, because we're talking about the Tomahawks and this, that, and the other. So worst case scenario, I mean, the easiest way to slap this on the head, and I'm not saying that Putin should go and do it, but the easiest way to stop this nonsense is for Putin to turn around and go, do exactly what America did and turn around and say, I'm not quite sure if we're going to sell Oreshniks to Iran yet. The decision hasn't been made. The West and Israel would have a meltdown, wouldn't they?
Yeah. But and you know what? All the governments in the West are counting on Russia being rational.
Yeah.
They're being irrational, and they're counting on Russia being rational to basically prevent it turning into World War III.
Yes. And when we talk about irrational, I mean, they sort of, God forbid that anything happens to Putin, because he seems to be one of the only adults in the room along with Xi Jinping and people like Orban. But here's the thing, James. We have to be careful what we wish for, don't we? I mean, if Medvedev was in charge, is Medvedev just talking, just playing the game?
I mean, no, Medvedev shouldn't be in charge. When he was president, a lot of, they allowed NATO to destroy Libya. So no. And then, he shoots his mouth off, so you don't want him to be. You don't want him to be president. He's not the right person for that. I mean, he's like the Russian Donald Trump or something. He's always tweeting some nonsense.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. There's somebody waiting to jump in. Who's put their hand up there?
It was me. Just a quick one. Do we actually believe Xi Jinping or Putin or the West? That's a question to James.
Right. I think China's interests are very simple. Their economy keeps growing, and they can produce, industrial goods cheaper than any of the countries in the West, and they just want to be allowed to sell them. You know, like they want people going on Amazon and buying things that are made in China, right? And that's that. And that's how they win. They get richer and richer, and so it's a very simple one. And where they're getting angry is because the US and other countries are engineering like artificial crises, like around Taiwan or around the South China Sea, and then using that as a pretext to put trade embargoes on China. And so, and they've lost patience with that.
Okay. Sean Murphy.
Well, I think if Putin had to be replaced, and hopefully he won't have to be, but for any reason, not particularly sinister, I think the best choice would be Sergei Lavrov, to be honest.
I absolutely agree.
He's so level-headed.
Yep.
He's so level-headed. He doesn't mince his words, but he's very level-headed. He knows where he wants things to go.
Yep.
And he's very level-headed about it.
Okay. That's a great call.
And he doesn't act rashly.
Yes. Okay. That's a great call. James, let's get into a bit of a bombshell, because Trump has turned around and said for us to, put these sanctions on Russia, we've got to have the whole of Europe not buying Russian oil and make sure that they don't, even though America are buying it under the table and selling it back to the European Union. The major problem we have with that is, of course, they're piling into Hungary and Serbia. Do you know who is the second largest EU importer of Russian oil, James?
No, I don't. Germany, maybe?
Not far off. You weren't too far away, pretty much next door. So let's get into this, because we're not hearing. All we're hearing is Serbia, and we're hearing Hungary. Let's have a little look, shall we? There we are. It's France. And of course, you've got France and Belgium there, Belgium just behind. But France are way ahead of Slovakia and not far behind Hungary. And yet we're not hearing about France at all, James Tweedy, as the second largest importer of pipeline gas and LNG in terms of millions of euros.
Yeah, it's all hypocritical. I mean, the US imports, it's not all of it, but it's like something like 10% or 20% Russia, right? And this is materials for making nuclear fuel. And they, uranium in like the compound form with a gas and things like that. So they, but what does the US want? It wants the countries of the EU and Britain as well to buy gas and oil from them, exclusive, and not from Russia. Cut Russia out of the market. That hurts Russia, but it also makes the US richer, because the price will go up, and they will be able to sell this, liquefied gas, which is more expensive because you have to liquefy it, put it under pressure on a special ship, and then sail it across the ocean, and then unload it, into the gas system in places like Milford Haven in Wales, right? And and they want them to buy, when the US is exporting oil, they want the oil price to be high. So, off they go. So they don't really care in fact, it's in their interest if the European economy suffers, because then you get Volkswagen setting up shop, setting up factories in the USA, like Mercedes did. And, if you buy a Mercedes 4x4 SUV, these luxury SUVs they sell, everyone says, oh, they're lovely cars, but the people who know say you shouldn't buy one because they're junk. And you know what? They're made in the USA.
Yeah, absolutely. We're waiting for Louis Bastos to jump in here. Louis?
Good morning, good evening.
Hello,
I just have a
buddy.
question. You think Hungary is paying its fine of 100 million euros a month in oil to Europe?
I think basically what we're talking is it's being fined €1 million a day.
Yeah. But explaining that, you think it's transparent? Sorry.
And Ukraine, and the EU have turned around and said, look, we'll give you 500 million of that 22 billion we owe you if you don't block the next sanctions package.
Mm-hmm.
And when he spoke to Putin said, get the money, we don't care about the sanctions. he said, let it go through. But Hungary, they would like Orban replaced because Orban is the thing that's stopping Ukraine joining the EU.
Yeah.
That's straightforward. Let's have a little look at this, because this is another bit of a staggering thing. This is from Douglas McGregor, who does have very good sources, because I know a few of my sources who know him. So we know that we have the same sources. Have a listen to this.
I have talked with my trusted sources in the intelligence community. There have been no provocative incursions by the Russians at all. The 19 drones that were found on the ground when they crashed or ran out of steam, whatever it was, many of them had Polish and Swedish SIM cards in them. So they may have been Russian at some point, but were ultimately repurposed and then through other means sent into Polish airspace as a false flag. There was no intention to violate anything. The Russians have been scrupulously careful not to give people in the West an excuse to start a war. That's bottom line, because the Russians do not want a war with NATO or the United States.
But James, pretty much what you expected.
Yeah, I mean that had come out before, and in fact, Russia was warning that they, after that happened, Russia warned that Ukraine, they had intelligence that Ukraine has managed to find a few intact attack drones, the geranium attack drones, that have, their warheads didn't go off when they fell and they're intact enough that you can get them to fly again. They're going to use them to attack a target, like say, one of these centers for shipping arms into Ukraine that's in Poland or Romania, as a false flag. So, they've already started. So it doesn't surprise me what he's saying. It's a classic thing. It wins a political argument. It may be intended to cause an escalation in the war, so some crazy people are trying to do that. But it is, it's more like it gives a political pretext not to make peace. They think that there's still got there are people who think that there is still some advantage to be had from continuing the war. It's hurting Russia on some level. It might actually, cause the government in Russia to collapse. Some of them probably still think so. Things like that. And of course, they don't care how many Ukrainians die, do they? Because
they've no intention. But I need an answer to a question, James. Allegedly, Russian drones attacked Poland, which it's of course complete baloney. Obviously a false flag, but essentially, what do we have? We have these drones called Gibera drones. This so far is the only thing which has been presented by Poland which has any kind of real relation to alleged attacks. Yeah. While there were none. Now, the Gibera is not a combat drone. It's essentially a decoy. It's a mid-range drone which is used as a decoy. It doesn't carry explosives, and it's used, of course, to overload the air defense. How did Poland miss whatever 19 they claim? Then they claim 7 or what have you. Evidently, it's obviously one of these decoys, which have been basically picked up by the Ukrainian side and then delivered for Poland and have these microchips put in, isn't it? All these SIM cards.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to control them in some way. Okay, and then again, it makes sense. If they're decoys, they don't explode when they hit anything. Then it is quite likely that a lot of them have just like run out of fuel and glided down and hit the ground, and they're not heavy. They might not actually, smash themselves to bits when they hit the ground.
Yeah.
So they could have captured a lot more of those, And they, like the one that had sort of floated down and landed on a chicken coop, and some people said it looks like they just took it and put it there, which they could have done. They could quite easily have put it there. Most people do not have radar sets. It's only really the Air Force and the Air Defense Forces and airports and things that have radar sets. And so you have to take the Polish government's word for it that they saw these things on the radar crossing the border and then shot them down.
Yeah. Talking of that, we've got some breaking news for you, or not so much some breaking news, but just a little taster of something for you. Because you remember a long time ago, we were talking about Kharkiv Hospital, who were literally having ambulances turned up and they were ripping kidneys and everything out of these mercenary soldiers while they were still breathing, while they were still alive. And of course, the gentleman who took these pictures for us, this is a good while ago, this is a year ago now, of course, has since disappeared. He's never been heard from again. His best friend has no idea where he is. But they would take these soldiers, still alive, mercenary soldiers, they would operate on them while still, they're not dead, they're removing their organs. And of course, they would turn up. And of course, once again, the chap who took all these pictures, as I say, has since disappeared off the face of the earth. And of course, we presume he's been killed by the Ukrainians for actually daring to give us these pictures. And of course, this gentleman turned up to pick up this kidney. And of course, he looks like a doctor, doesn't he? And of course, he came and then jumped in the ambulance, which was then driven to Germany. Now, the only reason I'm saying this is because a lot of the Ukrainian wounded are ending up in Germany. And when they do, boy, are they ever looked after. This is the Ukrainian wounded turning up, and there's an ambulance for absolutely everybody.
Ми вже прилетіли, і дивіться, яка кількість швидких допомог нас вже чекає. Неймовірно. Ще й там за кадром.
One ambulance per patient, James Tweedy.
Yeah, I mean, are they military wounded? Where are they going in that plane?
They have been flown there by the Ukrainians from the battlefield. They as
to where? Sorry.
Right, so they're being flown to Germany.
Okay. I mean,
which is where these organs are ending up.
Okay. I mean, if they are, a lot of them look like they were conscious. I mean, yeah, if they're going to, there's all sorts of questions in that. Why is Germany treating them?
There is.
Germany's not supposed to be party to the war. You could say it's a humanitarian thing, but Israel was doing that with members of Islamic State and Al Qaeda during the war in Syria, and everyone was saying, "Why is Israel doing?" Nobody believed Israel was doing it for humanitarian reasons. Israel is part of the war. Israel
not two words that normally go in the same sentence: Israel and humanitarian.
Right. Exactly. I mean, okay, so they're going. I mean, maybe if they die, then their organs get donated. But if you die in a state hospital, then do your organs end up on the on the private market.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And here's the
Go
thing,
on.
though, James. These people that are being treated royally are as of the normal Ukrainian guys are just left on the battlefield to bleed and die, the conscripts.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, you hear reports, you hear stuff about that, basically, quite a lot. And so we'll see. I mean, what can I say about it?
Okay.
If they're doing it. They're doing it. It's all distasteful, They are just generally treating.
Let's have an update. Let's have an update from Rybar then, and this is on the situation. Sean Murphy, very quickly.
Yeah, just a quick one, Warren. Well, from what I saw there, I mean, those aircraft are rolled for Kazovac because they've got the side fits, side fits and center fits for stretchers. If you know anything about rolling aircraft, like hooks and things like that. But it seems that they do have a fairly decent line of medical evacuation. And they do seem to have an evacuation plan.
Some for some, though, Sean, and not for others.
Well, this is it. You see, it's they're not being triaged in the traditional sense, are they?
No, it's Azov first, and then conscripts next. Let's thank you very much for that. Let's have a look at this from Rybar.
Over the past weekend, Russian forces launched a series of strikes against enemy military and industrial infrastructure. In the Kyiv region, Aish-101 missiles hit a thermal power plant and a mechanical plant in Bila Tserkva, as well as facilities in various districts of the capital. In the Chernihiv region, Russian forces destroyed a drone control center and energy facilities in Konotop. Strikes hit warehouses in Ochakiv and Belgorod-Dnistrovsky. In occupied Zaporizhia, drones struck industrial energy facilities, and in the Vinnytsia region, strikes on energy facilities paralyzed train traffic. In Kharkiv and Kirovohrad, drones attacked ferronetyl plants. Ukrainian forces also attacked oil infrastructure in Chuvashia, and Belgorod came under missile attack again. In the Sumy direction, fighting is ongoing on the approaches to the village of Novy Mir. Ukrainian forces are attempting to amass forces in the forest belts south of the village for further attacks on its territory. Enemy assault groups are being dispersed by drone operators. In the central sector, the Ukrainian armed forces have managed to occupy the right bank of the Zolotarevsky Nature Reserve. The Russian army likely withdrew to the opposite bank to establish new defensive lines along the water barrier. In the Slobozhansk sector, Russian troops are gradually expanding their zone of control near the Volchansk oil extraction plant. At the same time, the Russian aerospace forces are striking enemy personnel concentrations in the city, hitting deployment points and ammunition depots. On the northern flank of the Kupiansk sector, the Russian army is gradually approaching the center of Kupiansk. The difficult situation for the Ukrainian armed forces in this sector is also confirmed by enemy media. Entry into Kupiansk has been closed to civilians since September 28th. Positional fighting is ongoing near Stepovaya Novosilovka. The village itself remains in the gray zone. The Russian Ministry of Defense has reported the liberation of Derilovo from the Lyman sector. According to sources, the area remains a gray zone for now, with Russian troops only just bringing supplies to the forward positions in the village. On the southern flank of the sector, Ukrainian forces are attempting to disrupt communications between the 25th Army units in Zarekny using drone and artillery strikes. However, they are unable to recapture the previously lost positions in the village. Of Serebryanka and are now advancing toward the outskirts of the village of Rudnik. To the west, Russian troops are clearing strongholds where Ukrainian armed forces still maintain a presence. On the opposite flank, the Russian army is advancing on Vyemka, seeking to establish a southern encirclement of Seversk. In the Konstantinovka direction, volunteer corps units, according to preliminary reports, have liberated Maiskoye. To the southwest, Russian troops are attacking from the Yagodka gardening community deep into Konstantinovka. The situation here remains complex due to the airborne presence of Ukrainian armed forces drones and the difficult terrain. In the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd direction, heavy fighting is ongoing in the Shakova-Pankovka-Sofievka triangle. Russian assault groups have broken through to Dorozhnoye, coming within 2 kilometers of Belitskoye. The fog of war remains obscured in the vicinity of Pokrovsk. To the west, Russian troops are attempting to expand their zone of control near Kotlino. In the Novopavlovka direction, Russian forces are attacking the Novopavlovka side from Moravka and Filia. Ukrainian forces still maintain a presence in the Orakovaya Balka Nature Reserve. Meanwhile, Russian forces are advancing in the eastern part of Ivanovka, seeking to expand their held bridgehead. In the Novoselivka direction, soldiers of the 29th Army, advancing from Berezove, have driven the Ukrainian armed forces out of Stepov. They are now developing attacks on neighboring Verbove and Alexeyevka. Meanwhile, assault aircraft are advancing toward Novohrihorivka, seeking to establish a favorable position for an attack on Uspanovka from the south and north. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the situation has not changed significantly. Fighting is ongoing in the areas of Malatagmachka, Cherbakov, Stepnogorsk, and Plavny. Meanwhile, the infrastructure of the liberated territories continues to suffer from attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces. The enemy shelled Enerhodar and its surrounding area several times, forcing the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to rely on backup generators. In the Kherson sector, Russian forces are conducting airstrikes on the railway bridge on Korabel Island, which connects Korabelny with the rest of occupied Kherson. Ukrainian forces are taking measures to occupy the remains of the destruction and are preparing to transfer supplies to barges. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are conducting intensive shelling of the entire left bank.
So there we are, and the reason we're playing that is simply because, not because we're pro-Russian, I think personally Russia have a point in this war, and I think they had every right to do what they did. Not great at the way they did it, but I understand why they did it. Here's the thing, we are showing that because, of course, the Western channels won't show you that, so at least you have some balance from the other channels as well. James, when it comes to what's going on, and I'm going to show a video while we're talking, when it comes to what's going on, what's your take on where we are at the moment on the battlefield?
Okay, I mean, you have a situation where there are battles for 4 or 5 major cities. So there's Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka in the center in Donetsk, right? But then in the north of Donetsk Oblast region, there's Seversk, which is
this is what we're watching at the moment, by the way, is Seversk. Yeah, carry on, James.
So that's a town, and then if they take that town, then the next thing is the 2 big cities, the remaining 2 really big cities in Donetsk, which is what's it called, Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, or Slovyansk. Yes. And then you've got Kupiansk. North of there, you have Kupiansk that they were talking about, that the Russian army is entering the center of the city there. You see, if they take that, then first it opens up the road that goes towards Kharkov. I mean, they wouldn't be in Kharkov immediately. There's a smaller city in the way. And then, but they could also go south. Instead of going west to Kharkov, they could go south. And then, again, attack cities like Izium, which is north of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. And if they take that from the north, then there's all sorts of trouble for the Ukrainians, and so on. So basically, this is looking like the end game for taking control, taking full control of Donetsk. Yes. Which is the thing that, Volodymyr Zelensky said, I'm not going to give in to the Russian demands for a ceasefire, that we withdraw the army from Donetsk. Well, the army might be chased out of there in the next I'm not going to put a time frame on it. It will be long,
Yes.
sometime next year, maybe when it would be finalized. But that could happen. And there are other things that if you sort of if you pay very close attention, and you start counting stuff, which I've been doing, you can see that they've lost more than half of their equipment, including the stuff that's been supplied by the West. So they've got fewer tanks and fewer artillery guns and things like that than they did at the start of the war, even though their army is supposed to be several times bigger. So what are they fighting with? Just drones?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe just drones.
Lee Williams.
Who's winning the war? Is it Russia, Europe, and USA and the world, or I wouldn't know.
Well, let's put it this way: Russia are certainly sitting on 19% of Ukraine, and they're going to be sitting on a bit more of it. So that should tell you what way the wind blows. I would add this, Ryder. Nobody ever wins a war. There's only three types of people who win a war. That's politicians, arms dealers, and bankers, and that's it. Everybody else suffers either economically or physically, and of course, we're going to see more and more of that coming along. This is in Khaborsk. Let's have a look at this. And of course, we're seeing once again, James, lots and lots of horrific pictures here. There are more and more Ukrainians dying, getting blown up. They had a big hit on a military complex, and they also had a hit on the on a massive airfield where they were meant to be storing the F-16s, which has cost a lot of lives, and the Ukrainians have done a complete blackout on that hit on the airfield, which of course there weren't F-16s there, by the way. That was one of the ones touted where they were going to put the F-16s, but there was a significant loss of life there. Earliest indications we've got, and we're not talking about anybody huge, but we are talking about ground crew forces that were being placed there, and also Ukrainian troops as well. And they're talking upwards of 60 troops dead, and maybe another 30 or 40 injured, James.
Okay, I mean, things like that happen all the time. It's hard to say what's going on with aircraft being destroyed on the ground. The only concrete thing they said recently was that they destroyed 2 of those light training aircraft that they're using to shoot down drones, with like a machine gun or a rifle or something, an assault rifle. In the hands of the guy in the back seat. But they also destroyed these 12 microlights, or 10 microlights, which are being converted into attack drones. And you've probably seen videos of these. It's a light plane with a high wing on it. And they're flying them. They're putting explosives in them and a remote control system, and flying them into Russia and trying to hit targets with those. Sometimes you see a video of one being shot down and it explodes in midair. So they said they got 10 of those, but could be lots of those around. Thousands of them have been made. Most of them sold in Western Europe to enthusiasts. Okay. But things are going on. You sometimes see interesting things turning up in the Russian Ministry of Defense reports, and whether they're destroyed or not, you look for visual confirmation that they've been destroyed, and sometimes that comes up on the sites of the war watchers.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much to all the people who have watched the first half. Now, if you do want to, and we've got a lot more to get into, we would get banned literally for showing you what we're going to show you in the second half of the shows. So if you've enjoyed the first half of the show, come to warrenthornton.com or go on to Patreon and just type in Warren Thornton or The Real Truth 502. But Patreon, Warren Thornton, and of course, come and join the ever-growing band of people and have your say as well. We do have a different, should we say, a subscriber show for you in the morning. Lots of other articles and other appearances on other channels as well.